Have you ever heard the saying, thoughts become words, words become actions, actions become habits, habits become character, and character becomes destiny? In essence, a person's thoughts ultimately determine their fate. It seems profound, yet it's quite simple. A person's thoughts influence their way of life. Realizing this truth might come too late for some. This is a story about such a realization. My name is Diane, and I'm 54 years old, a working housewife. I've been married to my husband Dan for 30 years. Our 2 children are both matured, independent, and we spend our days leisurely as a couple. You'll be retiring soon, won't you? I mentioned this to my husband during dinner. My husband Dan, who's 3 years older than me, will retire in 3 years. He has been working as a bank employee for about 35 years since graduating from university.
That's right. It used to be standard to use severance pay to pay off house mortgages and prepare for retirement, right?
Yes, it was typical to pay off a mortgage in a lump sum with a substantial amount of money.
But that's not the case anymore.
Really? According to Dan, nowadays only a few companies pay $100,000 in severance pay, and most people are lucky to get even tens of thousands of dollars. Furthermore, with issues like needing $200,000 for retirement, more families prefer to keep as much cash on hand as possible. I listened intently to my husband's logical explanation. What should we do about our house?
It's a waste to pay the interest, so I think it's okay to pay off a substantial portion at once. We should be able to manage the remaining mortgage by saving on our living expenses. Fortunately, I can continue working as a contract employee even after retirement.
It's truly reassuring to have a financially sensible husband. You're so reliable. I said this to my husband as I poured him a beer. Then one day, an unusual guest arrived at our house.
Hey Diane, long time no see.
It was my brother John, who's 6 years older than me, and his wife Clara. I didn't want them to come here. I didn't say it out loud, but I think my face must have twisted noticeably. What could they want, visiting suddenly in the middle of a weekday? Then Clara blurted out, "Actually, we've built a new house, so we've come to get our congratulatory gift." A congratulatory gift? Demanding a gift is incredibly impolite. Don't you agree? But they think it's normal, which is troublesome. Thinking back, these two have always been greedy about money since their marriage. When they married, my then university student self was told by John,
"You're over 20, you're an adult. Whether you're earning or not, give us a wedding gift. It's a waste for a woman to go to university. I'd rather you used your tuition for our gift."
He said this without any shame. My parents were utterly disgusted by my brother's greed. I thought there was no one more money hungry than him, but Carla is on the same level. Every Thanksgiving and Christmas, it's always about money with them. "How much do you earn, Diane? What's your husband's bonus? What assets does your family have? How much pension does your father get?" There was a web service called Brainmaker that became popular a while ago, where you could analyze someone's mind by entering their name. If I entered their names, I could imagine money being densely packed in there. They are a vulgar and unreasonable couple that I kept my interactions with them to the bare minimum. Yet, they're asking for a congratulatory gift now. Wait a minute, a new house? I heard John retired at 60 this year. Carla seems to work part-time. This might sound strange, but what about the mortgage for the new house? Can they even afford it? I was about to ask this when John eagerly responded.
"Mortgage? There's no such thing. I built it with my retirement money and this one's parents' inheritance."
What? Apparently they used his retirement money of $80,000, savings of $140,000, and an inheritance of $250,000 from Carla's parents for the house.
"We've always lived in rented houses and wanted to experience owning one. Having a new house is great."
Really, it's much cleaner than this shabby house, barrier-free and secure for our old age.
But to gamble like that, I couldn't dare to do such a thing. But there are still 5 years until you receive your pension, and it might be better to have some savings for retirement. When I said this, Carla looked at me with utter disdain.
"You're such a worrywart. We've thought about that properly."
At that moment, my brother and his wife exchanged a sinister smile, which concerned me. what are they planning to do? I found out what they were up to a month later due to a certain incident.
Diane, your father has collapsed.
I received this message from my mother during my lunch break at work. Just a week ago when I had called, my father seemed perfectly fine. I explained the situation to my workplace and immediately headed to the hospital. There, looking exhausted with her shoulders slumped, was my mother, being comforted by Dan, who had arrived before me. How is Dad's condition? When I asked, my husband explained on behalf of my mother. Dad had suddenly collapsed in the bathroom and was brought to the hospital unconscious. The diagnosis was subarachnoid hemorrhage. Surgery was immediately performed and he is still being treated. Did you contact John about this?
Yeah, I did, but...
My husband hesitated to continue. Is there something wrong?
Well, before discussing his medical condition, they said they needed to talk about the inheritance and went to consult a law firm. They're not coming to the hospital.
What? How greedy can that foolish couple be? My father is still alive. Yes, he's in critical condition and anything could happen. But to start sorting out financial matters while he's still alive, I was so appalled that I lost my words. My mother also expressed her disgust at John and Carla's behavior, saying with a resigned look,
Really, it's astonishing. They're so foolish.
Later, Dad's surgery was somehow successful. However, his condition was precarious due to his advanced age. My mother and I took turns visiting him, but John and Carla never showed up once. A week after the surgery, we received a call from the hospital.
Your father's condition has suddenly changed.
Dan and I immediately took my mother to the hospital. Surprisingly, John and Carla had arrived before us. You're here early, I said to my brother, who, for some reason, had a pleased look on his face.
Yeah.
How can he look so happy when our father is in a critical condition? The reason became clear soon after.
Hey, what about your father's life insurance? Can you ask your mother about it?
Carla whispered this into my brother's ear in a low voice. In the quiet hospital room, everyone could hear it. I glared at Carla, but she looked back, bewildered, as if to say,
What's wrong with what I just said?
Her ignorance was infuriating. Then the doctor entered the room and examined my father.
I believe today will be a critical day for everyone.
The doctor said this with a grave expression, and damn, my mother and I broke down in tears. Memories of my father flashed through my mind. My mother, holding his hand, tearfully called out to him repeatedly,
Oh, honey.
But,
Finally, it's coming our way. We'll finally get it.
Yeah, this will secure our retirement.
I overheard such a conversation between John and Carla. While we were overwhelmed with grief, they seemed to be eagerly awaiting my father's demise. I remembered their words from before.
We've thought about retirement.
It was all about my father's inheritance. Their actions, from building a new home by depleting their savings to consulting a law firm, and now their conversations, it all made sense. My mother seemed to realize their intentions as well, looking disheartened as she turned to them. They looked like hyenas, gleaming-eyed, eagerly awaiting their prey to succumb. It is said that one becomes calm when anger reaches its peak, and it was true. My mother, feeling the same as I did, silently stared at my brother and his wife, then said,
Let's step outside for a moment.
We left the room and headed to the hospital's lounge to talk.
You two really don't know anything, do you?
My mother said this with a look of pity rather than disgust.
What do you mean?
Carla's expression hardened as she sensed something was off. John still had a smug look on his face, but perhaps not for long. My mother continued.
There's no inheritance for you two to claim. What? What do you mean, Mom?
My brother's face suddenly tensed.
There's nothing. The house and land we live in are in my name, and your father has no assets.
I recalled hearing about this. My father was the type to spend whatever money he had. He had a habit of spending all he had, with my mother managing the household finances. The only money my father was allowed to carry was enough for his daily cigarettes. Apart from his vague sense of money, he was a good husband and father, so my parents managed well together. My father truly had no assets, except maybe the $4 for cigarettes in his coin purse.
But he has life insurance, right? The beneficiary is me. It has nothing to do with you two.
My mother said this sharply. After all, my father was still alive, but to even mention life insurance while he was alive? How money-minded can this couple be? I was about to yell at them in anger when my mother laughed.
John, your father isn't the type to die from something like this. He came back fine from a motorcycle accident, survived a river current while skiing. Even when he had cancer, when he had liver cirrhosis, he overcame them with his strength and strong will to live. Carla, maybe you should worry more about your own husband than your father-in-law.
My mother said this to Carla, and it was John who lashed out in anger.
Mom, I'm still alive. Don't talk about inheritance. It's disrespectful.
Exactly. It's incredibly rude.
They were probably upset not only because they wouldn't receive an inheritance, but also because their own discussions about it had been brought up. However, they were silenced by my mother's words.
It's the same. You're doing the same thing to your father right now. Do you understand that now? You realize how unreasonable and disrespectful you both are, don't you?
They stood there dumbfounded, realizing that there was nothing for them to inherit.
What should we do? We built a house and bought a new car, thinking that we'd get inheritance. How are we going to live from next month on?
And last month, I did a lot of shopping on credit. Oh, and there are loans for the air conditioner and fridge we bought when we moved.
As adults nearing retirement age, their panic over not having money made both my husband and I take a step back. I then calmly suggested, first of all, counting on money you weren't even sure to receive was a mistake. Despite my criticism, they seemed too drained to argue back. Then, John spoke up.
Let's sell the house. It's the only way.
Though it seemed a sensible decision, Carla vehemently refused.
No way, that house is my castle. I won't sell it. It's our hard-earned sanctuary. I won't give it up for this. If there's no inheritance from father-in-law, then we should share mother-in-laws, right? Right? Let's do that. It's the best idea.
Carla said this as she looked at my mother.
I'm still alive, you know.
My mother's retort was almost like a punchline in a comedy sketch, and I had to resist bursting into laughter. My brother glanced at me as if pleading for help.
Please, help. Do something.
It felt like I could hear his inner voice. At that moment, Dan, a bank employee, spoke up.
Why don't you consult a financial planner? If you have zero income and no savings, it's a dire situation. But... What do you mean? Selling the house seems the most reasonable option. Fortunately, you don't have a mortgage, so selling it would bring in some cash to make living possible.
Selling the house was the only way out of this predicament, but Carla was persistent.
I said no, we're not selling the house. Absolutely not. If you insist so much, then you guys should take care of our living expenses. We're family, right?
Now she was directing her demands at us. However, my husband skillfully dodged this.
That's impossible. I only invest in profitable ventures.
His words carried weight, having worked for years in the lending department. Even if there was a return, I would never want to invest in such a couple. As we were discussing this, a doctor came to call my mother. The moment had finally come. I braced myself. Mother returned from the ward and said,
This might be bad news for you. Your father has regained consciousness.
She said this with a cold gaze towards John and Carla. Both my husband and I were relieved and teared up at my mother's words. To John and Carla, who had now realized they wouldn't get any inheritance regardless of my father's condition, his well-being seemed irrelevant. Yet pretending to be concerned, they said,
Oh, thank goodness, that's great.
Really, it is.
As my husband and I followed my mother into the ward, John and Carla tried to act nonchalantly and tried to follow after us. But my mother stopped them just before.
You two are fine. You reek of money and it's nauseating. Instead of visiting, think about your lives starting tomorrow.
Saying this, she shooed them away as if driving off stray dogs. Then she concluded with these words.
I'll leave you with this saying. Thoughts become words, words become actions. Actions become habits, habits become character, and character becomes destiny.
John and Carla were dumbfounded by her sudden lecture.
Huh? What?
In essence, your thoughts have determined your fate.
Unless you change your mindset, your destiny won't change. Stop here and think carefully. Reflect on how foolish, ugly, and pitiful your actions have been.
With that, she closed the door of the hospital room, a sign of her resolve to sever ties with her son. Afterwards, John and Carla had to sell their house. The newly built house they put up for sale in less than 6 months. Despite buying it for $400,000, including land and the building, it was sold for less than a quarter of that price. This was because soon after they bought the house, it was discovered that the land in that area was very fragile, causing a significant drop in land values. Additionally, other houses in the area were also put up for sale, leading to an oversupply and low selling prices. They had no choice but to sell the house, albeit reluctantly. The unemployed couple was left with only a small amount of cash, hardly enough for their old age. In 5 years before pension payments begin, they'll likely run out of money. John earns daily wages from day labor, and his wife works part-time now. Relying on an inheritance and leading to self-destruction is truly a ludicrous story. I hope they understand the weight of what my mother has said to them.
Well, such stories are surprisingly common. When people get blinded by money, they lose their ability to make sound judgments. I've encountered customers who said they'd pay off their mortgages with their inheritance once their parents passed away.
It seems there are quite a few people like that in the world. It really is a problem. Being a banker seems like a tough job, dealing with all sorts of people.
There are many more stories, but I can't really talk about them due to confidentiality obligations.
Next time, I'll let my husband do the talking. He might have more interesting stories to share. Just kidding.